The emergency beacon from the research ship Kethmoran screamed across space, cutting through the silence between stars like a dying breath. Deep in the void, 43 beings were slowly running out of time. Scientists, engineers, researchers, and their families from 6 different alien worlds, all trapped together as their ship fell apart around them. The Kethmoran had been studying ancient ruins on a dead planet when everything went wrong. Their fusion reactors started failing without warning. The life support systems began shutting down one by one. Now they were caught in a death spiral around a star that was eating itself alive, spitting out deadly radiation that cooked everything. Nearby, Dr. Veltar, the ship's captain, watched his instruments with growing horror. The hull was cracking under the stress. The air recyclers were working at half capacity. In the children's quarters, 12 young ones from different species played quietly, not understanding that death was creeping closer with every passing minute. The distress signal reached the mighty Corvan Empire first. These were the galaxy's warriors, with huge battleships and advanced weapons. Their military computers analyzed the situation in seconds. The conclusion was cold and final. Too dangerous, no strategic value, not worth the risk. Let someone else handle it, the Corvan commanders decided, then went back to their war games. Next came the Zenthari Collective, a race of beings who lived by pure logic. Their quantum computers were the most advanced in the galaxy, capable of calculating odds faster than light could travel. The numbers came back harsh and unforgiving. 12.7% chance of successful rescue, 847% more cost than benefit. To the choice was obvious. Logic demanded abandonment. The Vex merchant families controlled trade across dozens of star systems. They built their empire on profit margins and smart investments. But rescuing unknown aliens from a collapsing star system, there was no money in that. No trade routes to gain, no resources to claim. The Vex barely glanced at the distress call before dismissing it entirely. Most shocking of all was the response from the Kethmoran's own people. The Altherian Republic had sent these scientists on their mission, promising support and protection. But when the crisis came, their government quietly wrote them off as acceptable losses. 43 lives versus the enormous cost of mounting a rescue into a dying star system. The mathematics were brutal, but cleared as hours passed. The distress signal grew weaker. Power systems failed one by one aboard the doomed ship. The galaxy's greatest civilizations had all heard the call for help, calculated the risks, and chosen to look away. In the cold darkness of space, 43 souls waited to die alone. Lieutenant Commander Jin Park stared at the weak signal flickering on his screen aboard the human exploration vessel Determination. 3 months they'd been out here in the deep black, mapping star systems and looking for new worlds. Earth felt like a distant memory now, just another blue dot lost among billions of stars. The bridge was quiet, except for the soft hum of computers and life support systems. His crew of 37 humans was small, compared to the massive alien fleets that dominated this part of space. They were explorers, not warriors, flying a ship that was more science lab than battleship. Communications. Officer Na Kim broke the silence, her voice cutting through the stillness. Captain, we're picking up that alien distress call everyone's been talking about. Her fingers moved quickly across the glowing displays, pulling up data streams and signal analysis. It's the Kethmoran 43 beings trapped in the Helix Nebula system. The signal's getting weaker every hour. Jin had heard the rumors. Every major power in the galaxy had received the same call for help. The mighty Corvan Empire with their war fleets. The logical Zenthari with their supercomputers. The wealthy Vex traders with their massive ships. All of them had taken one look at the situation and walked away. Tactical Officer Haeon Lee brought up the navigation charts, his face grim. Sir, this is bad. The Helix Nebula is at the absolute edge of where we can go. We'd have to push our engines way past safety limits just to get there. And that's if nothing goes wrong along the way. The numbers painted a harsh picture. The determination was tough for a human ship, but she wasn't built for the kind of punishment they'd face flying into a collapsing star system. The radiation alone could fry their electronics. The gravitational forces could crush their hull. Like paper dot from the engine room, Chief Engineer Michoi's voice crackled over the intercom, tired but determined. "Commander, I've been running the numbers since we picked up that signal. The math just doesn't work. Our engines weren't designed for this kind of stress. We'll be lucky if we make it there in one piece, let alone pull off a rescue." Jin looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. Good people, all of them. They'd signed up to explore the stars, not to die in some impossible rescue mission. Every piece of data, every calculation, every logical analysis pointed to the same conclusion. This was suicide. But somewhere out there in the dark, 43 souls were dying while the galaxy's greatest civilizations had already given up on them. "Set course for the Helix Nebula," Jin said quietly, his voice steady. "Maximum burn." The determination screamed through space like a bullet, pushing harder and faster than any human ship had ever been pushed before. The hull groaned and creaked with every course correction, metal plates shifting and bending under forces they were never designed to handle. In the engine room, the fusion reactors burned so hot, they turned the air into a shimmering haze. Chief Engineer Michoi had turned their ship into a flying bomb. Every non-essential system was shut down, lights dimmed to save power, air recycling reduced to minimum levels, even the gravity generators running at half strength to squeeze every last bit of energy into the engines. The corridors echoed with the sound of overloaded machinery working beyond its limits. The crew couldn't even sleep in their own beds anymore. The power conduits running through the walls had become so hot, they turned the sleeping quarters into ovens. Men and women caught quick naps on the floor of corridors, using their jackets as pillows, waking up drenched in sweat from the heat bleeding through the ship's systems. Structural engineer Hojang wiped sweat from his eyes as he checked his readings again. "Hull stress is at 93%, he called out, his voice tight with worry. "If we push any harder, we're going to start losing pieces of the ship." Navigator Yu Song worked like a woman possessed, plotting course corrections around gravity. Wells that could crush them flat, and solar storms that would cook them alive. Through the view screen, they could see the dying star ahead of them, spitting out massive flares of deadly radiation that painted space in beautiful but terrifying colors. The journey was taking everything they had. 18 hours of flying at maximum burn, with another 12 hours still to go. The crew moved like zombies, exhausted but refusing to quit. They knew that somewhere ahead of them, 43 beings were counting down their final hours, while their distress signal grew weaker and weaker. Communications. Officer Na Kim monitored the chatter from other ships in the area. "The alien fleets are watching us," she reported. "The Corvin military is calling us tactically insane. The Zenthari computers have updated their files on human behavior to include something they're calling dangerous unpredictability." Jin almost smiled at that. Let them watch. Let them calculate the odds, and shake their heads at human stupidity. His crew was proving that sometimes the impossible just meant nobody had tried hard enough yet. The determination flew on through the cosmic storm, racing against time itself toward a rescue that every advanced civilization in the galaxy had declared mathematically impossible. 20-6 hours into their desperate race through space, the determination finally began to break. It started with a deep rumbling from the port engine that made the entire ship shudder like a wounded animal. Then came the alarms, sharp, urgent sounds that every spacer dreads hearing. Chief Engineer Mi Choi was deep in the engine room when the cascade failure hit. One moment she was monitoring power flows. The next, she was diving for cover as radiation leaked from cracked containment units. The deadly energy bathed entire sections of the ship in a sickly green glow that meant only one thing: death walking. The corridors, Medical emergency in Engineering Bay 3. Dr. Park's voice cut through the chaos over the ship's communication system. His usually calm tone was strained with urgency. I've got 4 crew members down with severe radiation exposure. I need emergency teams now. The ship itself seemed to be coming apart at the seams. Artificial gravity flickered on and off, sending tools and equipment floating through the air before slamming back down. The lights dimmed and brightened randomly as power systems fought to keep up with demands they were never meant to handle. Maintenance. Chief Woo Kim ran from crisis to crisis like a man fighting a forest fire with a water bottle. Every time he fixed one system, 2 more failed. Hull plates were buckling from stress. Conduits were overheating and melting. The determination was literally tearing itself apart from the inside out. On the bridge, Tactical Officer Hyun Lee watched the damage reports flood in. His friend and commander looked exhausted, staring at the tactical display that showed the dying star system still hours away. The right thing to do was obvious. "Commander," Hyun said quietly, choosing his words carefully. "We could still turn back. The crew would understand. Nobody would blame us. This isn't really our responsibility." Jin didn't take his eyes off the display. Somewhere in that stellar graveyard ahead of them, 43 beings were counting down their final hours, while the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy had already written them off as acceptable losses. "Did you know there are children on that ship, Yuan?" Jin asked softly. His voice was tired, but steady. "The Kethmoran's crew roster includes 12 young ones from different alien species." Hyun Lee fell silent. He knew his commander well enough to understand what those words meant. In human culture, the presence of children changed everything. It made turning back not just wrong, but literally impossible. The determination flew on through the darkness, leaving a trail of vented plasma and shed hull pieces in her wake as she pushed toward the impossible. The Kethmoran looked like a broken toy floating against the nightmare backdrop of a dying star. Through the determination's cracked view screen, they could see the alien research vessel twisting and bending as invisible forces tried to crush it like a tin can. Emergency lights flickered weakly along its hull, the only signs that anyone was still alive inside. Navigator Yu Song's hands flew across her controls, calculating paths through a maze of death. Chunks of planetary debris tumbled past them, some as big as city blocks. Solar flares erupted from the collapsing star, like the breath of an angry god, painting everything in deadly reds and oranges. 6 minutes, Yu Song said, her voice tight as a wire, maybe less. That ship's hull is already cracking. I can see atmosphere venting from at least 3 breach points. Jin gripped his command chair as another gravitational wave hit them, making the determination buck like a wild horse. I need everything you've got left in those engines. One last push. Chief Engineer Choi's voice came back immediately. Tired, but determined. I can give you 90 seconds of overburn, Commander. After that, we're running on emergency power and whatever prayers you've got left. The rescue happened fast and desperate. Transport Chief Bin Han and his team worked like their lives depended on it, which they did. The emergency transporters hummed and sparked as they pulled beings from the dying Kethmoran one by one. Scientists with 6 arms, engineers with crystalline skin, families huddled together in terror. The children came last. 12 young ones from 6 different worlds, scared and crying in languages no human understood but every human heart recognized. Jin watched them materialize on the transporter pad. Small and fragile and a live dot around them, the star system was dying in spectacular fashion. Solar flares lashed both ships like whips of fire. Gravitational waves bent space itself, making the stars seem to dance and waver. The Kethmoran groaned and screamed as invisible forces pulled it apart, piece by piece. That's everyone. Bin Han's voice cracked with relief as the last survivor appeared safely aboard the determination. 43 souls, all accounted for. The Kethmoran finally gave up the fight, just as they reached minimum safe distance. The alien ship folded in on itself like paper, crushed by the same forces that were now trying to drag the Determination into the stellar graveyard. But they'd done the impossible. 43 beings who should have died alone were now safe. Carried away from death by failing human engines and the stubborn refusal to abandon anyone in the dark. News of the impossible rescue traveled faster than light itself, racing through the galaxy's communication networks like wildfire. On hundreds of worlds, billions of beings watched the same incredible story unfold on their screens. A single human exploration ship had pulled off what every major civilization had declared mathematically impossible. The Determination limped home through space, her hull scarred and her engines barely functioning, but carrying 43 survivors who shouldn't have been alive. The rescued crew wandered the human ship's corridors like ghosts, still unable to believe what had happened to them. Dr. Vexdani, the Kethmoran's lead scientist, found herself asking the same question over and over again. Her 6 eyes would focus on whatever human crew member was nearby, and she'd speak in her clicking musical language. Why did you risk everything for strangers? We meant nothing to your species. Dr. Sopark, the Determination's chief medical officer, was treating radiation burns on his own crew when she asked him. His hands never stopped working as he applied healing gel to a young engineer's blistered skin. Because no one else would, he said simply, as if it explained everything. But it didn't explain everything to the rest of the galaxy. The Corvan Empire's greatest military minds gathered in war rooms, trying to update their files on human behavior. How do you plan strategies against a species that throws logic out the window when lives are at stake? Their computers kept spitting out error messages when they tried to calculate the tactical implications of beings who ignored math in favor of morality. The Zenthari Collective's quantum computers, the most advanced thinking machines in known space, actually experienced processing failures trying to understand human variables. The concept that proximity and capability created responsibility, regardless of profit, tribal loyalty, or logical benefit, simply wouldn't fit into their programming. Their entire civilization was built on pure logic, and humans had just proven that pure logic sometimes meant letting people die. Most embarrassing of all was the position of the Altherian Republic, the Kethmoran's own government. Citizens across their worlds were asking uncomfortable questions. Why did aliens care more about our people than we did? How do we explain abandoning our own while strangers risked everything to save them? The galaxy was waking up to a disturbing truth. These newcomers, these humans who'd only been traveling the stars for a few decades, operated by rules that made no sense to anyone else. They valued individual lives over mathematics, chose impossible heroics over logical self-preservation, and somehow, they kept making the impossible work. 6 months later, the galaxy was still trying to make sense of what the humans had done. The rescue of the Kethmoran had unleashed consequences nobody could have predicted. Those 43 survivors weren't just random people. They were some of the brightest minds in known space. Researchers whose work was reshaping everything. The galaxy thought it knew about ancient technology. Dr. Vextani and her team had been studying ruins left behind by a vanished civilization. Technology that was millions of years ahead of anything current species could build. When their ship was destroyed, everyone assumed that research was lost forever. But the humans had saved it all, and now breakthrough discoveries were flowing like water from a broken dam. New energy systems, faster than light communication, medical advances that could extend lifespans by centuries, all because for beings who should have died were still alive to continue their work. The economic value of their survival was already measured in the trillions of credits. Commander Jin Park stood in the great chamber of the Galactic Council, looking out at representatives from dozens of worlds. Beings with tentacles, crystalline skin, multiple heads, and forms that defied description, all of them still trying to understand why a small human ship had done what their mighty civilizations wouldn't. The chamber itself was a marvel of architecture, with floating platforms that adjusted to accommodate different species' needs. But today, it felt more like a courtroom, with Jin as the defendant trying to explain human nature to beings who couldn't comprehend it. "You speak of mathematical impossibility," Jin said, his voice echoing in the vast space. "But your mathematics didn't account for human stubbornness. You calculated risks and rewards, costs and benefits. We calculated how many beings would die if we did nothing." The Zenthari representative floated in a crystalline pod, its synthetic voice crackling with electronic confusion. "Your species operates according to irrational parameters. This rescue should have been impossible according to all known variables." Jin looked up at the gallery where the survivors of the Kethmoran sat watching. Dr. Vextani caught his eye and nodded slightly. 43 living, breathing pieces of evidence that impossible didn't mean what everyone thought it meant. "Maybe it should have been impossible," Jin replied. "But impossible is just another word for something no one has tried hard enough to accomplish yet." The silence that followed was deafening. Here was living proof that mathematics and logic weren't always right, that sometimes the most irrational choice was actually the wisest one. The Corvin Empire made the first move, though they tried to hide their embarrassment behind military jargon. These were the galaxy's toughest warriors, beings who had conquered star systems and built an empire on strength and tactical superiority. But a single human exploration ship had just shown them what real courage looked like. Their high command gathered in secret sessions, issuing new protocols that quietly revolutionized Corvin military doctrine. Now their fleets were required to respond to any distress call within their operational sphere. They called it tactical unpredictability enhancement. But every Corvin officer knew the truth. They'd been shamed by a species that had barely been flying between stars for 100 years. The Zenthari collective faced an even bigger crisis. Their entire civilization was built on pure logic, on quantum computers that could calculate the odds of anything in nanoseconds. But humans had just proven that their perfect mathematics was incomplete. The collective's greatest minds worked around the clock, trying to understand what they called irrational human variables. How do you program a computer to account for beings who ignore logic when lives are at stake? Slowly, painfully, they began adding new parameters to their decision-making systems. The concept that mathematical impossibility could be overcome through determination and sacrifice became part of their logical frameworks. Even the profit-obsessed Vex merchant houses discovered that humans had accidentally created something more valuable than gold. A reputation for keeping promises, no matter the cost. Trade agreements with humanity suddenly carried premium value, because other species knew humans would honor their commitments, even if it bankrupted them. Word spread quickly through galactic markets. When humans gave their word, they meant it. When they signed a contract, they'd rather die than break it. That kind of reliability was worth its weight in precious metals. But the greatest symbol of change was the determination herself. The ship that had nearly destroyed herself saving strangers became a galactic icon. Donations poured in from across the galaxy, not because anyone asked, but because entire civilizations felt compelled to help rebuild the vessel that had saved the Kethmoran. Corvin engineers provided armor, plating stronger than anything humans had ever seen. Zenthari technicians upgraded her engines with efficiency protocols that doubled her speed. Species from dozens of worlds contributed advanced life support systems, navigation computers, and medical equipment. The galaxy had learned something. That changed everything. The most valuable thing a species could possess wasn't the biggest guns or the fastest ships, but the simple refusal to let anyone die alone in the darkness. 1 year after that impossible rescue, the entire galaxy had changed. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with conversation in dozens of languages, as representatives from hundreds of worlds gathered for something that had never happened before, the formal adoption of what everyone was calling the human doctrine. Captain Jin Park stood at the center of it all, wearing the crisp blue uniform of the rebuilt determination. The same man who had once been questioned about humanity's irrational behavior was now about to receive the galaxy's highest honor for humanitarian service. The irony wasn't lost on him. Council President Thuvanis rose from her crystalline throne, her voice carrying across the vast chamber like music. "The humans have taught us something we had forgotten," she announced. Her words translated into every language in known space. That the survival of individual civilizations means nothing if we lose our collective soul. We are strongest when we refuse to abandon each other. In the gallery above, Dr. Vextani sat with the other 42 survivors of the Kethmoran. Their rescue had cost the humans dearly. Several crew members still carried radiation scars, and the original determination had been torn apart saving them. But from that sacrifice had grown something unprecedented in galactic history. The human doctrine was simple. When someone calls for help in the darkness between stars, someone answers. Always. No exceptions for profit margins, risk assessments, or political calculations. The mathematics of compassion didn't care about the odds. Fleet Admiral Kios spoke for the Corvan Empire. "We pledge our ships to this doctrine." The Zenthari Collective's quantum computers had already updated their protocols. Even the Vex merchant houses had signed on, discovering that a reputation for reliability was more valuable than short-term profits. Jin stepped to the podium and looked out at beings from across the galaxy, species that had once calculated the mathematical impossibility of caring about strangers. The chamber fell silent as he began to speak. "We didn't save the Kethmoran because we thought we were heroes," he said, his voice steady and clear. "We saved them because leaving people to die in the cold dark of space was never an acceptable option for us. The universe is vast and dangerous, but it's big enough for all of us, as long as we remember that we're all in this together." The applause started slowly, then built into something that shook the very foundations of the council building. Across the galaxy, billions of beings celebrated the day they learned that impossible was just another word for something worth trying harder to accomplish.